Okay.
Perfect. Okay, good evening, everyone. So sorry for the technical change there on the recording. We're just going to give it a minute in case there's anybody else who's going to join us live, and then we'll get started. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So I'm Katie Foley, and I am a fellow of the Society of Actuaries and the Canadian Institute of Actuaries. And I'm the instructor for the 30 Days to FAML Mastery class that will be starting. We have a session starting soon, and then we have sessions before each exam sitting that run in the 6 or 7 weeks leading up to the exam, that give you an overview of how you can prepare for those final weeks, and also has live sessions and many other benefits that we're going to talk about. So the exam that we're focused on today is FAML. So that is the L. The L means the long-term portion of this exam. And this exam currently can be taken on its own until July 2024. You can take it as just the long-term portion. And that is one of the transition rules that the SOA has in place as they move towards their new exams, where it's the focus on the FAM, and then you choose the advanced long-term or short-term. So for now, we're going to focus on the FAML because that's exam that's coming up, and that the people that we're looking for this particular course are focused on. So FAML, as you likely know if you're planning to study it, is focused on mortality models, life insurance, and annuities, and all the factors that go along with that. Premiums and policy values. So these are calculations that go along with insurance and annuities. And then there's also a section on different estimation techniques. The exam itself is 1 hour and 45 minutes, and it's 20 multiple choice. When you take this exam as a combined FAM exam with the long-term and the short-term together, then it's a 40 multiple choice exam. And so it's essentially double, but right now you can still take them separately. So the purpose of this session, this is a free introductory session, and this session is meant to introduce you to the mastery program, to let you know how that program goes, what it looks like, so that you get a chance to meet me either by watching this recording or in person. So for, I guess, virtually in person, for those of you who are attending live, please feel free to jump in with questions at any time. And then at the end, we'll have some dedicated time for discussion and questions as well. I will go through a little bit of some of the basic topics that we'll cover today, just so you can get a sense of some of the things that happen, how the style of the course goes. So it is an interactive type of course where, you know, there's a lot of back and forth, and students have a lot of opportunity to interact with me and to get individualized help. And today we'll also give you an overview of what do we go through in the 6 weeks, what do the structured lessons look like, what does it look like in between, and then of course to let you know how you can sign up and give you a chance to ask questions about that. So some more on the program details. The core part of this program are the 5 weekly sessions. So we have 5 sessions. They're generally held live on either Saturday or Sunday mornings, depending on the group and when they're best available. And those are 3-hour sessions where we spend quite a bit of time going through content. And we go through content, so there's a short lecture portion, and then we get into some detailed examples. And for these examples, we look at exam type questions. So they mimic the type of thing you would see on an exam. And students are always welcome to send me questions in advance of things that they're looking at. And we can look at those particular questions. And I have a ton of examples as well that I go through. I can also send around extra practice questions to students and just help them to work through those difficult types of problems. Then there's a 6th regular session, which generally happens a couple of days before the exam window opens. And so for each run of this program, we do the scheduling, and of course, once you join the program or as you're preparing to sign up, you'll get a listing of the exact dates and times of all the sessions. But that final Q&A session is generally 2 to 3 days before the exam window opens, and it's another session that is a full-length session, but it's not quite as structured because it's really focused on allowing the students to bring their last-minute questions, to go through anything that they're still having trouble with. And when we get, a larger group, it also is really helpful for students to see what are other students working on, what are other problems they've had. I often find students will share the ways that they do things, which can be really helpful because part of the battle is just getting within a group of people to study with. In between those weekly sessions, I am available, so students can email me questions. I've definitely had a lot of students email me, screenshots or pictures of their work to say, where am I going wrong? Or why isn't this working out for me? Can you give me a shortcut here, or is there a better way? So certainly I work with students a lot on those individual problems via email or a text or whatever works. We sort that out. Then there's also virtual office hours. So those are usually on Tuesday evenings. And that's a time where there's no structured lecture, but I'm available online via Zoom. And students can log in, they can bring their questions that they've been working on throughout the week, and we can go through any of those. It's also a time where some students will just log on to connect. If they don't have a particular question, they might see what questions other students have, and we get some great dialogue there where we can work through different problem-solving techniques. The final thing that we have available for members of this particular program is a discussion group. So that means that, 24 hours a day, you can go in there and post questions. And we often have students from across the country or even internationally. So, you can certainly go in there and post a question. And even if I'm not online, you might get a response from one of your peers. And it just helps to have questions and answers posted there. It makes it easy to go back and look at. So these are the main program benefits that we offer. So as we mentioned, this program really focuses on the 6 weeks leading up to the exam. So the 5 regular lectures happen from the 6th week to the exam up to the 2nd week before the exam. And then we have the final. So in those 5 regular sessions, so that's the FAM-L Mastery 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 that you see listed here. Those each have kind of a main topic that we go through, and then, they have some subtopics within. So the goal is through those 5 classes that we hit all of the topics that are on the syllabus and have time to touch on each of them. We start with, of course, the main topics that really form that underlying knowledge and comprehension techniques that students need. So we start with survival models and life tables and just some basics around insurance. So what I often find is that students will jump right into insurance and annuity problems without taking the time to understand how those programs work. And so in the first session, we do take some time to go through those, understanding what they are, and just helping you get that background knowledge that's going to really solidify what you're doing. Then we move quickly the next week into insurance and annuities and working through those problems. What are the different metrics we can use to measure them? What are the relationships and all of those formulas that go along with it? Making sure that everyone is clear on all of the notation. Certainly in this exam, there's a lot of notation, and we can make sure that you have that straight. The 3rd week, we move into future loss, to the different methods of calculating premiums, and policy values. So that is one of the key weeks, because this is where I find that students tend to start to get a little bit confused in sometimes relating the different topics. And so what this week's lecture, what that provides is an overview of how all of those different techniques and methods interact with each other, and just really solidifying the knowledge of the mechanics of those calculations. We move into, after that, the estimation methods, confidence intervals. So that's a smaller section of the syllabus. We often find that in that week, we do have some time to also go back through some other examples, because we find that that topic doesn't take the full lecture, which is great because that gives us some extra time to solidify the other knowledge. Then in the FAM-L Mastery 5 lecture, we look at some of those special topics. So, once we have a solid knowledge of everything else, we take some time to go and look at some of the less frequently asked questions, but ones that can really be a little bit trickier, or things that they don't come up too often, but actually, if you just understand the question, they can be pretty easy marks. So we go through those, looking at assumptions, what do they mean? How does changing assumptions change your results? And then, of course, as I mentioned, that last class is a final review where it's very student-led. Students bring their topics, their questions. Can always email me before. Some students are quite comfortable and confident speaking up in class. Others prefer to email me before and say, could you cover this? Either of those methods is totally fine. And we just spend a lot of time going through those last minute things, making sure everyone's in the right mindset, just giving some tips to, share resources to say, okay, which practice exams have you done? Which ones are left? That type of thing. You'll see in this table as well, I also have a column on the right where I give some indications on practice. And so this is a question that I often get is, how much practice do I need to do? Practice is key. If you've written any exact actuarial exams, which you probably have if you're on to FAM-L, you know that practice is really the key. So you spend some time going through the material and then get into that practice, and you're just drilling the problems. But there's still different ways we can do that. And I always recommend to students that if you get a question wrong, you go back, that you see why, go through the results, and then you keep that question in your rotation until you're able to do it confidently. And then you make sure you have other similar questions so that it wasn't just that you memorized that one question. So we spend time on that. And moving in closer to the exam, it's really important to do those timed exam simulations. So put yourself in an environment where you don't have your phone, you don't have distractions, you set a timer for 1 hour and 45 minutes, and you move through the problems. By the time you get to 2 weeks before the exam, you want to be doing that with no cheat sheets, no formula sheets. Really make it as though you were in the exam situation. And that helps students a lot, because what they find is once they get through some of those, you're able to build your confidence, you're getting higher scores, and that really can put you in the right mindset going into that final push and into the exam. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time, not too much, just doing a little bit of introductory theory review. And this is something that's been asked for in this intro course, just so you can see, what are the types of notes that I give out? What do my slides look like? What are the types of things we talk about? So this is some of the basic information. It's not super in depth, but it just gives an idea of how these classes look. So I'll just spend a couple of minutes here going through some sample slides so that you can see how that goes. One of the first things that we learn about, and in the first week, something that we talk about is an insurable interest. And I find this to be quite an important topic because, as I mentioned earlier, students jump into calculations, but it's good to understand what you're doing. And so an insurable interest is really what talks about can a person or an item have an insurance policy? And so if we think about the history of insurance, there was a time, in the mid 20th century, probably, when insurance was first starting. And what happened was that people started taking out insurance policies on anybody. So, for example, people would take out an insurance policy on a celebrity. And what happened is that then people were financially gaining from the deaths of these other individuals that they had no financial connection to. Became a little bit like gambling, essentially. And also, it resulted in potential crime, right? Potential threats to people who had these policies taken out on them. And so one of the legal actions that came in, and what we now see as a very core concept, is that in order to have an insurance policy on a person, you have to have a financial connection. So it has to be that if that person died or had a disability or whatever the insurance policy is on, then it would result in a financial loss or hardship. And so that's why, you can take out a life insurance policy for yourself, for your spouse, for your children. And that's where that lands. When it comes to objects to items, you can take out an insurance policy, obviously, on your vehicle, on your home, on a mortgage, things like that. But it has to be something that, again, if that was destroyed or lost, it would cause you financial hardship. So this is just the concept that comes into place to say, what are these insurance policies and why do we have them? Actuarial notation. So this exam really starts to get into some pretty hardcore actuarial notation, which might be new to students who are taking this exam because there's not quite as much in the exams that come before it. So we spend some time in the first class talking about that, and the second class as well. And so these are some of the main ones that I have in this table here. The first one here, we have the TPX. And we talk a lot about, what do these all mean? So TPX is the same as our SX of T. And this is our survival function. So our survival function is based on a P, which means that a life age X survives for at least T years. And that's how that notation works. Then we also have 1 minus that. So 1 minus our survival function, we have our regular FXT. And this is where we can more easily relate it back to general probability and general distribution functions that you already know. But when we get into actuarial notation and life contingencies, we tend to use more shorthand. Actuaries are very well known for using shorthand. They don't want to write more than they need to. And so we represent that with TQX. So while P represents the probability of survival, Q represents the probability of death. So TQX is the probability that an individual, age X, dies within T years. Actuaries tend to get into even more shorthand. And if the T that they're looking at, so if they're looking at survival or death within just 1 year, if T is 1, they drop the 1 entirely. So these are the types of things that you need to spend some time getting used to in preparation for this exam. QX, same thing, you can drop the 1. Once we understand the notation, then we get into applying that notation. So now we can look at, okay, well, we had TPX. What if we want to look at different periods of survival, right? So maybe we have a period of survival that we want to calculate the probability for, but we don't know, we don't have the information. But we do have, for example, the information for a shorter period of time. And then we get into how can we manipulate these formulas so that we can calculate what we need. So if you have a TPX and you maybe don't have the information, you can split it into T plus U if you had a smaller portion. Then you can end up multiplying them to get the full thing. So for example, here we have t plus u px. So say you have a person age 50, and you want the probability that they survive to age 80. So that would be 30 years. You don't have the 30-year probability, but say you have the 20-year probability. So instead of calling it 30p50, we can call it 20p50 and then multiply it by what's left, which is going to be 10 years left after that. But then it's the p70. So you have to increase that one by whatever you had first applied. So this is just a way that we can manipulate the formulas to calculate what we need based on what's available. Then we get into some equations. We spend quite a bit of time during the lectures going through what are the equations that you need to memorize. And generally, I encourage students to have a cheat sheet that you have with you when you're studying of things you need to memorize, especially these formulas. And then as you prepare and get closer and closer to the exam, you study that cheat sheet and you go through it and you rewrite it as you memorize things, or you cross things out as you memorize them, so that what you have left to memorize gets shorter and shorter. Because as you know, as you go through more and more examples, then these things become second nature. So here we have the equation T bar U QX. So that's the probability that a life age X survives for T years, but then they die within the next U years. And then we have different ways in which we can break down that probability. During the course, we use a lot of things like timelines for different examples and just have different ways to write things out and to explain how things happen. A little bit of background, a lot of this course focuses on mortality. And of course, it talks a little bit about assumptions. That's one of those extra things that we talk about as we go. And this helps for some of those questions on the exam where it's not quite as calculatory, but it's a little bit more about understanding how things work. And so, for example, we look at this mortality graph here, we can see that in general, as age increases here on the x-axis, the probability of dying, so your QXs within a year, will increase. That makes sense. But then some things to note when we're looking at mortality, as you look at these higher ages, you get this kind of spike. So there will be a bit of a spike, but also there's not a ton of data. So it's harder to really get good estimates at those ages. You can also see what, we don't always expect, but before we get this kind of smooth upward motion, you have this drop, and that's because of the infant mortality. And then what's also interesting is that you get here this little hump, around ages 17 to mid 20s, which tends to be the young adult hump, where we see deaths due to more accidental causes and things like that. There are more things to consider with mortality, other assumptions, other things to think about that's not shown here. One of the main things that we're looking at now is, of course, COVID experience. So have mortality rates changed because of COVID-19? So over the past few years, of course, mortality has been impacted. But what we're waiting to see now is, will that last in the long term? One of the things that often comes up on the exam is looking at mortality rates that might differ based on different aspects of the population. So you may have one set of mortality rates for males and one for females. You may have different mortality rates for smokers and non-smokers. So there's a lot of different indicators that can go into the determination of mortality. And we often end up having to do things like weighted averages in these exams. So these are different things that we can look out for. In the course, we get into some of the more intricate details of the calculations. We look at select and ultimate rates. We look at, how do these tables work if you get a table like this on an exam, how do you read it? How do you know which value to take? And, and give an example here of looking at the probability of death at age 41, that can actually be seen in a couple of different places in this table. So how do you know which one to pick? And this is something that we talk about a lot in the course. And we do quite a few examples with Select and Ultimate. Most groups that have gone through, that can be something that, the concept is not too difficult, but all of the numbers in the tables can sometimes be confusing. Okay. So for example, in this bottom line here, we have our Q for a select age 43. And when a life is select, they have different mortality rates. So generally they have, improved mortality where they maybe have declared themselves to be healthy. They don't smoke, things like that. And so they have these adjusted rates for a period of time. But then after a while, those rates go back with the general population. So the probability of death within a year for a life selected at age 43 might be 0.005, as it is here. But that's not the same as the probability of death within a year for a life age 43 that's not part of the select group, which is 0.012, which we can see based on our right-hand column over here. Okay, so those are not the same. But as I mentioned, after a period of years, these do revert back to the normal population. And in this example, it's a 2-year select period. So once you get beyond those 2 years, then it goes back to normal. So a life that is selected at age 40, by the time they get to age 43, their death probabilities have reverted back to the normal population. The next main topic that we have is life insurance. This is another type or another section where there's a lot of different notation, and students can get a little bit confused with that. So we do spend some time making sure that everyone knows which is which, that you're not confusing this little one here on the term insurance with when it's not there on the endowment. It's a small change between the two, but it makes quite a difference in their values. And then we spend some time looking at, how do we relate these to each other? What are all those equations that you need to memorize? Which equations that you maybe have on your memorization list are just iterations of each other that if what you struggle with is memorization, you can drop. So we look at a lot of different techniques there. Valuing insurance benefits. So there are questions on the exam. Always one of the major components of the syllabus is valuing those insurance benefits. And sometimes you do that based on a life table. Sometimes you do it based on integration. Sometimes you do it based on a summation. Sometimes there's shortcuts. But we look at the main components in every case. And that's always going to be the benefit. What are the benefits that are payable? The discounting, time value of money, right? If that benefit is not going to be paid for another 5 years, how do we value it now to bring it back in time? And then the key thing, the probability of the payment. So even if you have an insurance benefit that pays, $1 million at death, if that is an insurance policy that's only valid for 5 years, there's a low probability it's going to be paid, especially if someone takes it out, say, at age 50. So we always need to be able to calculate the probability that the payment is going to occur at each particular period of time. So what this allows us to do is just create a really good framework for calculating insurance benefits that students can apply each time, so that even when the question is worded differently or it's asking you to solve for something different, you can still break it down into these 3 components and know what you're looking for. We do look, of course, at all of the different formulas and the different ways to calculate. So we have our continuous benefits, where we have our bar on the top, which represents the continuous. And those are calculated by integration. And again, here we look at the different components. So in this example here, it's just simplified to do the formulas. We're assuming a $1 benefit. And then as I mentioned on the last slide, after we consider the benefit, we consider the discounting, time value of money. And then we consider the probability of payment. So an insurance is going to be paid on death, right? Could be at the end of the year, or in this continuous case, could be on the moment of death. And so that's going to be paid for each T. It would be paid if they survived until T. And then the mu, which is the force of mortality, is what caused that death within that next instant. So again, it's benefit, time value of money, and probability. And we go through that process so that it really becomes second nature to calculate. We have a similar process with the discrete, where instead of an integration, now we're doing a summation. So we have our benefit, our time value of money, and our probability using our K-bar QX. So you can see that these are a little bit different based on whether it's continuous or discrete. And we make sure that students are aware of those differences, and then that you also know how to convert between them using the different methods that are available. Moving into premiums. Okay, so this is kind of how the flow of the lectures go, right? So by the third lecture, we get into premiums, where we look at equivalence principle and the portfolio percentile premium principle. Those are the two main ones that are used on the exam. Equivalence principle is the most common, and it's the one that you'll use most frequently. It carries on into exam AL-TAM if you decide to continue and take that one. But portfolio percentile also is on the syllabus and has been tested on FAM-L before. So it is one that you need to know. And it can be a little bit trickier to calculate. So it's one that we spend some time making sure that everybody is comfortable with. So that kind of brings us through the third week. And of course, during the lectures, we expand on these a lot more. We go through a lot of examples. Students have the opportunity to ask any questions, bring any examples with them. Then we move into the estimation, and then the final review, extra topics, things like that. So another thing that I want to cover today is the aspect of this course that's related to study strategies and performance optimization. So, by the time students get to exam FAM-L, you've proven you're good at math, you can get through these exams, and you have the ability to learn the concepts. But as you continue to move through the exams, they get harder, of course, and maybe you have more responsibilities if you're working, whether it's in an actuarial field or not, and you need to manage all of those things at once. So we spend time talking about how can you make sure you're studying effectively, and how can you make sure that you're really ready for the exam so that you can be at your best on that day and you can optimize all of your performance. So the study process, we talk a lot about this and identifying where you are in your study process and making sure that you haven't skipped any steps. So there's that preparation phase, which happens, first when you decide you're going to take the exam. You should set out your timeline, make sure you have all your materials, find a study group. And if you don't have a study group, this program is a great place to find one. And then you want to schedule your study time, which again, for students who have trouble with the discipline of scheduling that, a program like this is great because it forces you to attend that lecture. It forces you to do the practice problems that we send out. It gives you an opportunity to attend a office hour where you can connect with other students. So it helps keep you accountable. Once you have that, students should spend some time on their own reading through the material because you want to have that, that basic knowledge. And most students, by the time they come to this mastery course, they've already done that portion. And that's great because you have all that background information. So you're ready to really do a deeper dive. The initial practice phase is when you're going through lots and lots of practice problems just to see where you are. So during that phase, it's always good to take notes. Make sure you have some system to mark which sections are hard for you, to know where you need to focus more time. Then you go into the content review. And so the lectures for this program really do cover that review of content section of the study process, because it allows a recap, right? You spent the time reading through all the content, and now we have a recap where you can solidify all of your understanding and make sure you know how to apply it to the problems. It also is an opportunity to identify, okay, this section is hard for me. I need to spend some more time. And it's where you start formulating that cheat sheet that I talked about of what are the things you need to just memorize. The final step, practice. Practice, practice, practice. Do as many practice questions as you can, do timed exam simulations, and spend that time to memorize the things on your cheat sheet. So that's the process. And when you join this program, I can help you figure out where you are in that process, if you've skipped any steps that you need to go back and do, and make sure that you are staying on track within those last 6 weeks to really make sure that you are ready. As we move towards the end, and start to think about where are we, and students tend to get really, really focused on their studying and making sure that it is successful. It's good to do successful studying all the time, but especially when you get into that last 6 weeks. Some things that you can do if you're having trouble, make sure you're in a quiet space. Not always possible. Maybe you have roommates, maybe you have kids, who knows? Get some noise canceling headphones. Lots of things you can do. And I can always help students to brainstorm to find ways to make their situation work for them. Tracking study time. There are many different opinions on this, whether it helps or not. I have found that it's helped a lot of students, not all of them, but a lot of them, just to see how many hours that you're putting in. It can help you stay on track, give you a guideline. Making note of formulas, which we've mentioned. Taking breaks, so figuring out, what is your optimal amount of time you can study? How often do you need breaks? What do those breaks need to look like? Organization. I've definitely seen a lot of students waste time where they know there are things they need to go back and look at, but they don't remember where it is. So being organized and knowing where things are, either in your physical papers or in the folders you have saved on your computer, knowing what's where, can really be helpful. I've helped a lot of students to create systems where they're able to flag things and know what they need to go back to. And then, can't stress it enough, so good to do those timed practice exams. As you get really towards the end and you're going into exam day, help students prep for that. And, sometimes we have students come to a last office hour just to kind of, debrief and see where they are, get those last minute good luck tips from from me as the instructor and also from the others in the group. And then make sure that you do those last few things, sleep the night before your exam. Sounds simple, but it really helps. Make sure you eat. I literally have had a student tell me I had to leave the exam early because I was too hungry. Eat. Arrive prepared. You don't want to get there and realize you don't have a calculator, or your calculator doesn't work, or whatever. So make sure that the day before the exam, you actually take some time, or that you have enough time in the morning to make sure you have everything that you need. Once you get in the exam and they kind of say go, then you can start to make your little notes, depending on the prometric system or wherever you are, how you can, work with that to make a quick note of the formulas that you think you might forget. And then finally, when you're in that exam, you've got to manage your time. Don't spend too much time on one question. If it's something that you can't get, mark it so that you come back to it and then move along. You don't want to spend all your time on one question that you might not get anyway, when there's a bunch of other questions you can confidently get. So you want to get through all those ones you can confidently get. So those are some of the things that we talk about In doing the program, the mastery program, it's so great because I can get to know each student and we can focus on what are the things that they need to succeed. So these are the types of things that we look at, but we really individualize it as we get through the program. So that's an overview. I will open it up to any questions that can go in the chat. And for those who are watching this on a recording later on, you can certainly feel free to reach out to Howard or I with questions. And we can certainly get those answered for you and make sure that you have what you need. And then to sign up, you just connect with Howard and he can get you connected, get you all signed up and connected directly with me so that you can get the Zoom links and everything else that you need. Question there, sessions are on the weekends. So yes, the sessions are generally on the weekends because we found that's when the most people can attend. Of course, there are always things that might come up. So we do record the sessions and they're made available to people who are registered. So after the session happens, then as soon as the recording kind of saves and we're able to upload it, it goes out to all the participants. And then a question there about pricing. So Howard, did you want to jump on at this point and talk about pricing? Or did you want to address that separately?
I said, I'm going to send out an email to everybody with all that information.
Okay, perfect. And that's great because we'll use this intro recording that we might have for different iterations of the course. So certainly reach out to Howard and he can work with you on pricing to get a plan that's going to work for you. So if you are thinking about, joining the program, certainly it's definitely been helpful. We've had great feedback from students. As you're getting closer to the exam, people do have questions. I see one coming in about how much time do you need to study for this exam? If you're doing FAML on its own, it's really a unique exam in that it is a shorter exam. So if you have background in things like interest theory, if you know anything about life contingencies at all, if some of the material that I went through today kind of, seems like it could be familiar, then likely you would have time to study. Study time is really individual. People who are working full time, of course, need longer to prepare because you don't have as much time to study. If you're a student or if you're working part-time, then you might have more time to devote to studying, and you might be able to fit in, say, 20 hours of studying a week, in which case you could likely prepare for this exam, in a much shorter amount of time. So how much time you need to study is definitely individual. But certainly once you get into those last 6 weeks, that's where, we go through all of the material in this course, and you could just go through it then, but you would need to do, of course, some extra additional work in addition to the course to make sure that you have all of the background and that you've gone through the material. Okay, so that's all the questions that I see come in through the chat there now. And then, of course, like I mentioned, if you're watching the recording, please feel free to reach out to Howard or I with any questions. So thank you all very much, and we hope to see you join the program.